She hid that she'd been a fortune teller. Cowboy asked her about his own future. The cards were face down on the table when I came in. I didn't know that then. I just saw a table by the window with something turned over on it, and a woman standing at the wood stove with her back to me, and I was cold enough that I didn't pay much attention to either. That was late October, somewhere west of Ridgeline, in a territory that didn't have a proper name yet for the county. I'd been riding the same stretch of high plain for going on 3 days without seeing a soul. My horse, a big gray gelding I called Dutch, had thrown a shoe somewhere on the flats and was walking tender, and I was leading him by the time I spotted the smoke from her chimney. The place was a small homestead, soddy walls, plank floor, one window that faced east. She glassed it. Didn't see too many women who went to that trouble this far out. She heard me knock and told me to come in without turning around. "Got a lame horse," I said, "wondering if you've got a nail and a hammer and a spare shoe, or if that's too much to ask." She set down whatever she was stirring and turned. 30, maybe 32. Dark hair pinned up loose, some of it coming down around her ears. She was looking at me the way people sometimes look when they are trying to figure something out fast. "Shoes in the lean-to," she said, "but it's nearly dark and the ground's getting hard. You'll want to wait for morning." She was right. I knew she was right before she said it. Her name was Ida Voss. She didn't offer it right away. I asked if she had a name I could call her by, and she gave me a look like that was a strange thing to need, and then she said Ida Voss, just like that. Both names, like she wanted me to have the whole of it so I couldn't reduce her to something smaller. I told her mine, Tom Cutler. She nodded once and went back to the stove. There was a cot in the corner, and she pointed at it and said I could sleep there if I wanted something better than the lean-to floor. I said I'd take the lean-to floor. She looked at me a moment, then nodded like she respected that. I ate some of her stew. She let me. After supper, she cleared the table, and I saw then that what had been sitting face down was a deck of cards, though not the kind you'd play with. Bigger, heavier paper. She stacked them quick and put them in a cloth bag and tied it shut and put it in a box on the shelf, and she did all that with her back to me and a kind of efficiency that meant she'd done it before. I didn't ask. I went out to the lean-to. Dutch was calmer. I checked his hoof in the dark with my fingers. The nail bed was clean, no deep bruise. He'd be all right in the morning. I lay down on the floor with my coat over me and listened to the wind work at the corners of the lean-to and thought, this is my life, leading a lame horse to a stranger's door, eating someone else's stew, sleeping on dirt. 44 years old and not a single thing I could point to and say, there, that one's mine. That one I built and it stayed standing. I wasn't sorry for myself about it. I want to be clear about that. It was just accounting, just adding it up the way you add up a column before you sign anything. I'd had a ranch once, a piece of one, a third stake in a place up by the Larimer Fork with 2 other men. We'd worked it 4 years, and then one of them drank the money, and the other one sold his stake out from under us both to pay for the first one's debt. And by the time I figured out what had happened, there was nothing left to figure out. I'd had a horse before Dutch, a sorrel mare named Cass that I raised from a foal, and that died of a broken leg out in bad country. I'd had a woman once, or something like one. She'd been in Bent Creek for 6 months, and then she left with a dry goods man from Missouri, and I couldn't honestly say I blamed her. So Tom Cutler, that was the accounting. I was up before light. The shoe was a near fit, half a size wide, but I had the tools and I made it work. By the time the sky was going gray, I had Dutch in good shape, and I was leading him back and forth along the fence line to check his gait, and he was walking clean. When I turned toward the road, the light in her window was on. I stood there a minute. The right thing was to knock and say thank you and ride. I knocked. She opened the door already dressed, hair done, coffee on. She looked past me at Dutch. "He's walking sound," she said. "He is. Thank you for the shoe." "You're welcome for the shoe." I should have gone. I had my hat in my hand and Dutch's reins in the other, and there was nothing holding me there but the cold and something I couldn't name right then. "Could I trouble you for coffee?" I asked. She stepped back from the door. I sat at her table and drank coffee, and she stood at the window looking out at nothing in particular, and I could see in the set of her shoulders that she was deciding something. Not about me, about herself. "How long have you been out here?" I asked. "1.5 years. Alone? Mostly. That's a long time." She turned from the window and looked at me. Is it? For a woman alone, on the high plain. I suppose it depends on what you're used to. I drank my coffee. The fire was good. Outside, the wind had quit for once, and there was just the quiet and the smell of her coffee and that hard, clear light that comes in October mornings through good glass. After a while, she said, "Those cards you saw last night." I didn't see much. You saw enough to wonder. I set down my cup. I used to read fortunes, she said. In Cheyenne for a while, and before that in a place outside of Denver, tables in the back of saloons mostly, sometimes in hotels. She was looking at her hands flat on the table. I was good at it. What made you stop? She was quiet for a moment. I told a man something he didn't want to hear, she said, and he went out and did the thing I told him not to, and it happened the way I said it would happen. She looked up. I don't know if I read something true in those cards, or if I just read something in him that he already knew and had decided. I don't know if there's a difference, but either way. Either way, I agreed. I don't do it anymore. She got up and poured herself coffee and sat back down across from me. But you kept the cards, I said. I kept the cards. I turned my cup on the table. There was a crack in the glaze along one side, an old one, stained brown. That man, I said, the one you warned. He died, yes. You think you're responsible for that? She didn't answer right away. I think sometimes knowing something is a kind of weight, whether it's yours to carry or not. Well, I said, that's a hell of a thing to live with alone. She looked at me. Not sharp, just straight. Something in her eyes was measuring me, and she wasn't pretending she wasn't doing it. You're not what I thought when you came in last night, she said. What did you think? A drifter, just a man between places. I am a man between places. Maybe, but that's not the whole of it. I didn't know what to say to that. I wasn't used to someone looking at me and seeing more than the surface of the thing. I picked up my hat, I turned it. I should ride, I said. Yes, she said, you probably should. I didn't. I spent 3 more days at Ida Voss's homestead. I told myself it was because she had work I could do, and she did, real work, the kind that a woman alone out there piled up faster than she could get through it. A section of the fence along the north side that was listing bad. A place in the soddy roof where the packed earth had thinned and was starting to let cold in. The lean-to door hung wrong on its hinges and banged in any wind. I fixed all of those things. On the second day, she brought me water where I was working on the fence, and we stood there in the cold with the mountains behind us and talked about nothing much. The weather, the price of nails, whether the ground had already frozen too hard for a proper post set. On the third day, it snowed. Not a blizzard, just steady from mid-morning on, the kind that comes quiet and stays a while. We sat in her house that evening, and she made a dinner from dried beans and salt pork, and it was the best thing I'd eaten in longer than I could recall. And I said so, and she looked across the table at me and said, "You mean that?" Not a question, like she was just checking whether I was the kind of man who said things he meant. "I mean it," I said. She nodded once, like that mattered. After we ate, she put the dishes in the basin and came back to the table, and she said, "I'll tell you something, and you can do with it whatever you want." I waited. "I've been out here a year and a half," she said, "and you're the third person who's come to that door. The first 2 I sent on their way as fast as I could manage. You I kept." "Why?" She put both hands flat on the table the way she had before. She looked at her hands. "Because when you came in," she said, "and you saw those cards, you didn't ask, you just left it alone." She looked up. "And when I told you about it this morning, you didn't try to talk me out of it. You just said it was a hell of a thing to live with." "It is." "Yes, but most men would have had an opinion about whether it was real, about what I should think about it, about what I should feel. I don't have much use for telling people what to feel." "No," she said, "I can see that." The snow had stopped outside. The silence was the particular silence of snow, thick and close and full. "What are you heading toward," she asked, "when you ride out?" I sat back. I thought about it honestly. "I don't know," I said. "I've got about $40 and a sound horse and not much else." "Is there somewhere, anyone?" "No." She was quiet for a while. I told myself when I came out here, she said, that I wasn't going to need anyone, that needing someone was the thing that had got me into trouble every time. Has it? Yes, she paused, but I think I've been confusing needing the wrong people with needing people. I looked at her across the table. Her hands were still flat on the tablecloth, still calm, but there was something in her face that hadn't been there 2 days ago, or maybe it had been there and I just hadn't earned the right to see it yet. Ida, I said. Tom, she said, quiet and even. That was all. But the way she said my name, just my name, nothing more, was the first time in longer than I could put a number to that I felt like I was someone specific. Not just a man between places, not just a drifter, Tom Cutler, specific, seen. I stayed the winter. I don't know that I decided to. There wasn't a moment where I sat down and waited out. There was just one day, and then another, and the fence got finished and the roof got right, and I put in a proper door on the linta with good hinges that didn't bang. And the snow came for real in November, and we were 2 people in a small house on the high plain, and we learned how to be in the same space without friction. That took a little doing. She had her way of doing things, the dishes in a specific order. The fire banked a specific way before bed. She didn't like noise in the mornings until she'd had her coffee and stood at the window for a while and looked at whatever she needed to look at. I learned that. I learned to be quiet in the mornings. I learned that she thought better when she was walking and would sometimes just go out in the cold and walk the fence line and come back, and whatever had been sitting wrong in her head would be cleared. She learned me too. She learned that I needed to do something with my hands if I was going to be still, that I slept light and woke hard, that when something was bothering me I went quiet and it was better to ask me directly than to wait it out. She asked directly. One night in December, when I'd been quiet through supper and into the evening, she just said, "What is it, Tom?" Not, "Are you all right?" Not, "What's wrong?" Just, "What is it?" Like she already knew there was something and she was ready to hear it and she didn't need me to decide whether it was worth saying. So I said it, all of it mostly, the ranch stake gone, the sorrel mare, the woman who left, the accounting I'd done in the linta the first night, the total I'd come up with. She listened without moving. When I was done, she sat with it for a moment. Then she said, "That accounting's wrong." "How's it wrong?" "You left yourself out of it," she said. "You put in the things you lost and the things that went bad. You didn't put in what kind of man you are." "What kind of man is that?" She looked at me steadily. "The kind who sees a card deck on a table and doesn't pry. The kind who fixes what's broken and does it right and doesn't talk about it. The kind who tells a woman her stew is good because it is and not to be polite." She paused. "The kind who woke up before dawn to shoe his own horse so he wouldn't be more trouble than he already was." I didn't say anything. "That's not nothing, Tom," she said it plain, no softness in her voice, just straight. "That's not nothing." I'd heard things like that said before. Flattery, usually, something to get something, but she wasn't the kind, and she wasn't saying it to make me feel better. She was saying it because she thought it was true, and she thought it needed saying. That's different. A man can tell the difference. I sat with it a while. Then I reached across the table and put my hand over hers, and she turned her hand over and held on. That was December. In February, on a day that was cold but clear, the sky that specific winter blue that looks almost wrong, too bright, she brought the card box down from the shelf. I was mending a bridle at the table. She set the box down and opened it and took out the cloth bag and undid the tie. I put down the bridle. She set the deck on the table between us and looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at me. "Ask me something," she said. "Ida." "I want to," she said. "I've been wanting to for a while. I'm not going to tell someone what's going to happen to them. I know better than that. But I'd like to." She stopped, smoothed the cloth bag flat on the table. "I'd like to just look again with someone here who I trust." I looked at the deck. "What do I ask?" "Anything real," she said. "Not trick questions, not whether you'll be rich, something true." I thought about it. "Ask about me," I said. "What you see when you look at me." She was still for a moment. Then she picked up the deck and held it in both hands for a second and set it down and cut it once and laid out 3 cards face down in a row between us. She turned the first one over. I don't remember what it showed. Some figure, some image, I didn't know the meaning of any of it. But she looked at it, and the corner of her mouth moved just slightly. "What?" I said. "It says something about a man who's been carrying something heavy for a long time," she said, "and who's about to be done with it." She turned the second card. She looked at it for a long moment, then she looked up at me. "What's it say?" I asked. "It says he found someone worth staying for." My throat did a thing. She turned the third card. She looked at it. Her eyes went a little soft, which was not a thing I'd seen from her before, just that small softening. "Ida," I said, "what's it say?" She put her hand on top of the 3 cards, covering them. Then she looked at me across the table and said, "It says he doesn't know yet that she was going to stay anyway." Before she pulled these cards, before this morning, she'd already decided. The fire was burning. Dutch was in the lean-to. The sky outside was that wrong, too bright blue. I couldn't speak for a moment. She slid the cards back together and set the deck aside, and her hand was still on the table, and I covered it with mine. "You decided," I said. "Last month," she said. "Sometime around the middle of January, I think. When you came in out of the cold and you didn't say anything, you just saw I'd been crying and you went and made the coffee and brought me a cup and sat down across from me and didn't ask about it." Her eyes were steady. "That was when. A man knows when he's been seen, not what someone wanted him to be, not who they needed to fill a space. But actually seen, the specific shape of him, the real one, seen clearly and chosen on purpose. I knew it then." We sat at that table for a long while after, the cards between us and the fire going and the winter blue sky outside the window, and she put both hands around the coffee cup and looked at me with that calm she had, that serious, unflappable calm that I had come to know was the truest thing about her. She didn't tell me what my future held. She was already in it, that was the answer. Come spring, I built a second room onto the soddy, proper plank walls, a good tight floor. It took 6 weeks. She brought me water and sometimes sat on an overturned bucket nearby and read, and we didn't need to talk much to be comfortable in the same space, which is the kind of thing you don't know you were missing until you have it. The room was done in April, when the high plain was just beginning to show green at the bases of the grass. I was standing in the doorway looking at what I'd built when she came up beside me and put her hand through my arm and looked at it with me. "It's solid," she said. "Should last," I said. She leaned her head against my shoulder. I put my hand over hers. That was mine, that room, that woman, that morning. Whatever I'd put in the accounting that first night in the lean-to, whatever I'd come up with, I'd done the math wrong. She told me so, and she was right. I'd left myself out of it. Tom Cutler, specific, worth staying for. That turned out to be enough.